Welcome to this special podcast, sponsored by Murphy Business Sales Edison, New Jersey office, where your business aspirations meet expert guidance. Whether you're looking to sell your business or explore new acquisition opportunities, we are here to support you every step of the way. Join us as our hosts deep dive into small business topics which are relevant for buyers, sellers, and other transaction advisors in the ecosystem.
All right, so today we're going deep on the hotel and lodging industry in New Jersey.
Right here, right now.
Exactly as it stands today.
Yep.
And you've brought us quite a bit of information here.
I did.
Got industry reports, some association news, even some economic data to dig into.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
I'm excited.
Me too.
So I guess for this deep dive, our mission should be to, kind of get a really clear picture of what the New Jersey hotel scene looks like today.
Okay.
And then, I think it would be really interesting to get a sense of what makes these properties valuable.
Sure.
Where the growth potential is.
Yeah.
And even how lawmakers can be involved to help or hurt the industry.
Absolutely. I think all of those are really key things to look at.
Okay, so let's unpack some of this stuff.
Let's do it.
So you brought an AHLA report.
I did, yeah. The American Hotel and Lodging Association.
Right.
And in July of 2022, they projected that by the end of that year, the money coming in from hotel rooms and the taxes they pay to state and local governments
was going to be higher than in 2019?
Okay, so already exceeding pre-pandemic levels.
That's what they were projecting, yeah.
And that's nationwide.
Nationwide, yeah.
Wow. So that's a great bounce back.
It sounds really good on the surface.
Okay.
But that same report mentioned that when you adjust for inflation, the revenue per available room.
RevPAR?
Yeah, RevPAR.
Everyone in the industry knows RevPAR.
Everyone knows RevPAR. It's kind of your key metric.
Right.
So that wasn't actually expected to get back to 2019 levels until 2025 nationally.
Oh, wow. So even though the raw numbers are higher, the real purchasing power is not there yet.
Exactly. The dollars coming in are bigger, but they don't stretch as far as they used to.
Yeah. So it sounds like a good news, bad news situation.
Kinda, yeah.
So what kind of raw numbers were they looking at for 2022?
So they had projected over $188 billion in revenue from hotel rooms nationwide.
Wow.
And nearly $43.9 billion in state and local tax revenue from hotels.
Wow, those are huge numbers.
Huge, yeah. And you said that doesn't even include inflation.
No, that's just the raw dollars.
Right, so the real numbers would be even less impressive.
That's impressive.
Okay, so they're making money, but they're not making as much as it seems.
Right.
What about the actual occupancy rates? How full were the hotels?
Yeah, so that same AHLA report projected an average occupancy rate of about 63.4% nationwide for 2022.
Okay. So
getting
much closer to pre-pandemic levels.
Right, but not quite there yet.
Not quite there yet, no.
All right, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things we hear everywhere we go is about staffing shortages.
Oh, tell me about it.
How did that play out in the hotel industry in 2022?
Yeah, so the AHLA estimated that by the end of 2022, the industry would employ about 1.97 million people.
Okay.
Which is a lot of people, but it's only 84% of what it was in 2019.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they didn't see it getting back to those levels until 2024 at the earliest.
Okay.
And their surveys showed that most hotels were really struggling to find enough workers. So that's a tough spot to be in.
It is, yeah.
Because the demand is there.
Right.
But you can't necessarily fulfill it.
Exactly. If you don't have the staff, you can't run at full capacity.
Right.
Makes
sense.
So, yeah, it's a challenge.
Okay, so we got the national picture from the AHLA.
Uh-huh.
Now, you brought us some information from March of 2023.
I did.
From the New Jersey Restaurant and Hospitality Association.
The NJRHA.
NJRHA, what did they have to say?
So their report really highlighted the tax revenue part of things.
Okay.
They were projecting that for 2023, the money hotels generate in state and local taxes across the country would hit a new record high.
Wow. Even higher than 2022.
Yeah, they estimated it would be $46.71 billion.
So that trend from the AHLA report is continuing.
Absolutely. The money's still coming in.
Okay, so that gives us the national picture.
Yeah.
Now let's really zoom in on New Jersey.
All right, let's do it.
So you brought us an IBIS World report from November of 2024.
I did.
And this gives us some New Jersey-specific data.
Exactly.
So what do we see there?
So IBIS World was projecting that the hotels and motels industry in New Jersey would reach $3.7 billion in revenue by 2025, with steady growth leading up to that.
Okay, so continuing to grow, they also said that there were 2,272 businesses in this sector operating in New Jersey.
That's right.
Employing about 18,585 people.
Yep.
So we're talking about a pretty big industry here.
Yep, for sure.
Did they say anything about where these businesses are concentrated in the state?
They did, yeah.
Okay.
They highlighted Bergen, Middlesex, and Essex counties as having the most hotels and motels.
Okay, so kind of the more densely populated areas in the north.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So that gives us a good sense of the scale of the industry.
Uh-huh.
Now, you also brought us a report from the New Jersey Department of Labor and Workforce Development from the winter of 2021-2022.
Yep.
So going back a little bit further here.
Yeah.
But this seems to give us a much wider view of leisure and hospitality in the state.
It does, yeah.
Which, of course, includes our hotels.
Absolutely.
So what were some of the highlights of that report?
So one thing that really stood out was just how important leisure and hospitality is to New Jersey's economy.
Okay.
Back in 2020, this sector had 281,783 jobs.
Wow.
Which was 8.8% of all private sector jobs in the state.
So a pretty significant chunk of the workforce.
A huge chunk, yeah. And it represented about $12 billion of the state's GDP in 2020.
Okay, and that's the real GDP.
Real GDP, yeah.
So adjusted for inflation.
Right.
Which means it's an even bigger deal.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is a big part of the New Jersey economy.
It is, yeah.
Now, did the report say anything about wages in this sector?
It did, yeah.
Okay.
So employers in this sector paid out over $8 billion in wages in 2020.
Wow.
But the average annual wage was more than $45,400 less than the average for all private sector jobs in New Jersey.
Wow, that's a pretty big gap.
Is, yeah.
So I guess that tells us that a lot of these jobs are probably entry-level or seasonal.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of them are not those high-paying year-round positions.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing to consider.
It is.
Now, the report also talked about the impact of the pandemic, right?
It did, yeah.
So what did that look like for leisure and hospitality in New Jersey?
It was a huge hit.
Okay.
The sector's GDP dropped by 31% from 2019 to 2020.
Wow. So basically a third of their economic activity just disappeared.
Pretty much. Yeah, it really shows how vulnerable this industry is to things like travel restrictions and limits on gatherings.
Right, because if people can't go out and about, then there's no need for those businesses.
Exactly.
Okay, so a pretty dramatic impact for the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, this report also looked at how employment within leisure and hospitality has changed over time.
It did, yeah.
So what kind of trends did they see there?
So from 1990 to 2020, the percentage of people working in accommodations actually went down.
Okay.
While the percentage working in food services and drinking places went up significantly.
Interesting. So more people are working in restaurants and bars than hotels now.
Proportionally, yeah.
Okay, so a pretty big shift over time.
It is.
And within the accommodation sector itself, there were still job losses even before the pandemic hit.
Right, between 2010 and 2020.
Okay.
And the report pointed out that a lot of those losses were in Atlantic City's casino hotels.
Okay, so they were already facing challenges even before COVID.
Yeah, probably from competition in the region and some casinos closing down.
Right, so a lot of factors at play there.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, this Labor Department report also broke down employment by county, right?
It did, yeah, for 2020.
Okay, so what did that look like?
So the counties with the most people working in leisure and hospitality were Bergen, Monmouth, and Atlantic.
Okay, so Bergen, again, makes sense with all those businesses.
Right.
But Monmouth and Atlantic, those are big tourist destinations.
Yeah, especially with the Jersey Shore.
Right, so it makes sense that they'd have a lot of those jobs.
Yeah.
Now, did the report say anything about how those jobs are distributed throughout the counties?
It did, yeah.
Okay.
For each county in 2020, they showed how many residents there were for each job in accommodations and for each job in food services and drinking places.
Okay, so that gives you a sense of how important these industries are to each local economy.
Exactly, yeah. You can see where those jobs really make up a big part of the local workforce.
Okay, so we've gotten a pretty broad overview of leisure and hospitality in New Jersey.
Yeah, I think so.
And that gives us a good foundation to dive into some specific areas.
Sounds good.
So you brought an HVS report from August of 2023.
I did.
That focuses on the Jersey Shore hotel market.
Yeah, how it's been recovering and growing.
So what did they find?
So the report was really positive about the Jersey Shore.
Okay, good news.
Yeah, it highlighted that counties along the shore were seeing record levels of occupancy tax collection.
Okay.
Which is a great sign that demand is back after the pandemic.
So people are coming back to the Jersey Shore.
They are, yeah.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, it's good for the economy.
Absolutely.
And the report also talked about how there's been a lot of redevelopment of older motels.
Okay.
And they're adding new attractions that are geared towards families.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they're really investing in the future of the Jersey Shore.
So it's not just about bouncing back, it's about actually improving.
Exactly. Yeah, they're trying to make it even better than it was before.
All right, and this report broke down some of the trends by county, right?
It did, yeah. Each county has its own unique story.
So let's go through them one by one.
Okay.
What about Monmouth County?
So Monmouth County had a really quick recovery after the pandemic, and they're not as reliant on those summer tourists.
Why is that?
Well, they're really close to New York City.
Right.
So they get a lot of visitors year-round.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about Ocean County?
So Ocean County has seen a lot of development of upscale condos and townhouses.
Okay.
But they also have some new hotel projects coming up near Six Flags Great Adventure.
Oh, wow. That's a big draw.
It is, yeah.
When are those supposed to open?
They were expected to open in late 2024.
Okay, so very soon.
Yeah.
All right, now what about Atlantic City?
So Atlantic City has really been trying to market itself as more than just a gambling destination.
Right, they've been working on that for a while.
Yeah, they want to attract a wider range of visitors.
And how are they doing that?
So they've got new attractions like the Island Water Park at Showboat.
Okay.
And they're really trying to diversify their offerings.
So moving beyond just the casinos.
Exactly.
Okay, and lastly, Cape May County.
So Cape May County has always had really strong occupancy tax collections.
Okay.
And they have this cool trend of renovating existing motels.
Uh-huh.
But they're keeping that unique doo-wop architecture.
Oh, yeah, that's a big part of their appeal.
It is, yeah. They're trying to modernize, but also preserve their history.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a good balance.
So overall, the Jersey Shore seems to be doing really well.
Yeah, they're recovering, they're growing, and they're looking to the future.
That's fantastic.
It is.
Now, you also brought us another HVS report.
I did.
This one from September of 2023.
Yep.
And it looks at the Meadowlands development.
Right up in North Jersey.
Yeah, so what's happening there?
So the big thing is the proposed Meadowlands Convention Center.
Okay, I've heard about that.
Yeah, it's a huge project.
How huge?
Like $1.6 billion estimated cost.
Wow.
Yeah, and it would include a big headquarters hotel and potentially 2 more hotels on the site.
Okay, so a lot of potential for growth there.
Absolutely.
What's the timeline on that project?
It was still awaiting final approvals at the state level.
Okay, so still in the works.
Yeah, but if it goes through, they project it could bring in $30 billion in spending over the next 30 years.
Wow, that'd be massive for the region.
Yeah, it would be a huge economic driver.
Okay, now the Meadowlands has also seen a lot of activity thanks to the American Dream Mall, right?
Right, even though it's had some financial challenges since it opened.
But the report mentioned that hotels in the Meadowlands already serve an important purpose.
They do, yeah.
How so?
Well, for one thing, they offer a more affordable alternative to staying in New York City.
Okay, so if you don't want to pay Manhattan prices.
Exactly, you can stay in the Meadowlands and just take a train in.
Makes sense.
And they also have parking for larger vehicles, which can be really hard to find in the city.
Right, that's a big deal for some travelers.
It is, yeah, especially families or groups.
So even without the convention center, there's still demand for hotels in the Meadowlands.
There is, yeah.
Now, what about new hotel development in the area?
So the report said that there hasn't been a lot of new construction lately.
Okay.
The newest hotels there opened back in 2020.
So there's definitely room for growth.
For sure, especially if that convention center gets built.
Okay, so we've talked about the state of the industry in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how these hotels are valued.
Okay, let's talk numbers.
You brought us an HVS report from March of 2025.
I did, yeah.
That looks at valuation drivers and rates of return for limited service hotels.
Right, that's a specific segment of the market.
So this is where we get into the economics of it all.
Yeah, how investors decide what a hotel is worth.
Exactly.
So this report focuses on 2 key metrics.
Right.
Capitalization rates, which are often called cap rates.
Okay.
And rooms revenue multipliers, which is shortened to RRM.
So let's break those down.
Okay.
What exactly is a cap rate?
So a cap rate is a way to measure the potential return on investment for a hotel property.
Okay.
It's calculated by taking the hotel's net operating income.
Uh-huh.
And specifically, that's their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
EBITDA.
Exactly, EBITDA.
Got it.
And then you subtract a reserve for replacements and renovations.
Okay.
And you divide that by the market value of the hotel or its purchase price.
Okay, so it's kind of like a price-to-earnings ratio for a stock.
Yeah, kind of. But in this case, a lower cap rate usually means the property is worth more.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive.
Okay, so lower cap rate means higher value.
Exactly.
Got it.
So that's cap rate.
And what about RRM?
So RRM is a bit simpler.
Okay.
You just take the selling price of the hotel and divide it by the total revenue it makes from renting out rooms in a year.
Okay, so basically how much you pay for each dollar of room revenue.
Yeah, exactly.
And with RRM, a lower number usually means lower value.
Right, unlike with cap rate.
Okay, so they move in opposite direction.
Exactly, yeah.
The report mentioned that you can't just look at cap rates and RRMs from recent sales and apply them to any hotel.
Right, you can't just plug and play.
So what else do you need to consider?
You have to look at the specific characteristics of each hotel.
Like what?
Things like its age, its location, the brand it's affiliated with, whether it's been renovated recently, and the overall market conditions in the area.
Right, so a lot of factors at play.
Yeah, a lot of nuance.
And the report also included some data on trends in cap rates and RRMs from 2024.
It did, yeah, but they didn't give us the specific numbers in the X-ups you shared.
Right, but it's still helpful to see those trends.
Absolutely, it gives you a sense of where the market is going.
And one more thing to keep in mind is that cap rates and RRMs only give you a snapshot of 1 year.
Right, they're based on a single year of performance.
So if a hotel isn't stabilized yet, you might need to adjust those metrics.
Yeah, if their revenue or expenses are fluctuating a lot, you can't just rely on those numbers.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, we also briefly talked about interest rates and how they can affect property values.
Right. There was a mention of that in an Event Temple article from October of 2024.
Yeah, so how do rising interest rates impact hotel values?
So generally speaking, when interest rates go up, it makes it more expensive to borrow money.
Okay.
So if someone wants to buy a hotel and they need a loan, they'll have to pay more in interest. And that can make them less willing to pay as much for the property.
So the prices go down.
Yeah, basically because financing is more expensive.
Okay, so that's another important factor to consider.
Absolutely. The broader economic climate definitely plays a role.
So now that we understand how hotels are valued, let's talk about growth opportunities.
All right, where's the industry headed?
We've touched on some of this already, but let's bring it all together.
Sounds good.
So first of all, we're seeing continued recovery in the market.
Definitely, especially in those leisure destinations like the Jersey Shore.
Right. And you mentioned some specific projects that are in the works.
Yeah, like the Meadowlands Convention Center.
Right, with all those potential new hotels.
Exactly. And along the Jersey Shore, there's a lot of reinvestment happening.
In those older properties.
Yeah, through renovations and new construction.
And then there are those new hotels planned near Six Flags Great Adventure.
Right. A Hilton Garden Inn and a Spring Hill Suites by Marriott.
Yeah, and those are supposed to open soon.
Late 2024.
Right, so more options for people visiting that area.
Definitely.
And then we talk about the redevelopment of the former Atlantic Club in Atlantic City.
Right, that's now a hotel and condo development.
So a mixed-use project.
Exactly.
And then there's also the potential for future phases of that massive redevelopment at Bader Field in Atlantic City.
Yeah, that's a longer-term opportunity.
But still a lot of potential there.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like we're seeing a mix of established tourist areas getting upgrades and new developments popping up.
Yeah, it's a good balance.
Now, the AHLA report also mentioned leisure travel.
Oh, yeah, that's becoming really popular.
So that's where people extend their business trips for leisure.
Right, they might tag on a weekend getaway after their meetings.
And could New Jersey benefit from that trend?
I think so, yeah.
How so?
Well, New Jersey has a lot to offer in terms of leisure activities.
Yeah, we've got the beaches, the casinos, historical sites.
Right, and we're close to major cities like New York and Philadelphia.
So people could easily add on a few days of fun after their work is done?
Exactly, and New Jersey hotels could really capitalize on that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then we also talked about how the Meadowlands could benefit from its proximity to New York City.
Right, by offering more affordable accommodations.
Exactly, for people who don't want to pay those Manhattan prices.
Right, it's a good alternative for budget-conscious travelers.
Now, finally, the Labor Department report had some projections about job growth.
It did, yeah, from 2018 to 2028.
So what do they say?
So they projected that leisure and hospitality in New Jersey would grow by 12.7% during that period.
Okay.
Which is a lot faster than the overall state average of 5.6%.
Wow, so this industry is expected to outpace the rest of the state?
That's what they were projecting, yeah.
So that's a good sign for job seekers in this field.
Definitely.
And they said that both accommodations and food services would see an increase in jobs.
Yeah, and in fact, they projected that food services and drinking places would create the second highest number of new jobs in New Jersey overall.
Wow, that's a lot of growth.
It is, yeah.
And the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector was also projected to grow.
Right, so it's a good time to be in those industries.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges and the opportunities. Now let's talk about how lawmakers can get involved.
Yeah, what role can they play?
So we know that organizations like the New Jersey Hotel and Lodging Association,
NJH and LA.
right, NJH and LA and the NGRHA, are actively advocating for the industry.
They are, yeah.
And they work with policymakers at both the state and national levels.
Exactly. They try to make sure the industry's voice is heard.
So, for example, they were involved in pushing for state-level approvals for the Meadowlands Convention Center.
Right, because that project needs those approvals to move forward.
Okay, so lawmakers have a role to play in making those big projects happen.
Definitely.
Now, what about the workforce shortages?
That's a big one.
Yeah, we talked about how widespread that problem is.
Right, and the AHLA and its foundation have been working on initiatives to attract more workers to the industry nationwide.
Okay.
So lawmakers in New Jersey could consider implementing similar programs at the state level.
Like what kind of program?
Well, things like training programs, apprenticeships, maybe even tax incentives for businesses that hire new workers.
Okay, so giving businesses some help in attracting and retaining employees.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, the Jersey Shore report also mentions some tension between renewable energy projects and concerns from coastal residents.
Right, the offshore wind farms.
Yeah. How do lawmakers navigate that?
Well, it's a tough balancing act.
Okay.
They have to weigh the benefits of renewable energy against the potential impact on the environment and the tourism industry.
Right, because some people worry that those wind farms will hurt the view.
Exactly, and that could deter tourists.
So lawmakers need to find a solution that works for everyone.
Yeah, it requires a lot of communication and compromise.
Okay, now what about local zoning laws?
Those can have a big impact on hotel development, too.
How so?
Well, they can either make it easier or harder to build or renovate hotels.
So lawmakers at the local level need to be mindful of how their decisions affect the industry?
Absolutely, yeah. They need to create an environment that encourages responsible growth.
And then there's the issue of taxes.
Right. The NJHLA has been advocating for changes to the tax code.
To make it more favorable for the hotel industry.
Yeah, because taxes can have a direct impact on profitability.
So lawmakers can use tax policy to either help or hurt the industry.
Exactly. They can incentivize investment or they can make it harder to do business.
Okay, and lastly, we talked about the panic device law.
Right. That's a law that requires hotels to provide their workers with panic buttons.
To help protect them from assault.
Exactly. It's a safety measure.
And the Labor Department has been enforcing that law.
They are, yeah.
So that shows how lawmakers and regulators can work together to ensure worker safety.
Absolutely. It's an important issue.
So overall, it seems like lawmakers have a lot of tools at their disposal.
They do, yeah.
To help shape the future of the hotel industry in New Jersey.
For better or for worse.
Right. Their decisions can have a big impact. Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into the hotel and lodging industry here in New Jersey.
It has, yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the current state of the market to the factors that drive property values and from the growth opportunities to the role of lawmakers.
It's been a comprehensive look.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
Given New Jersey's unique blend of established tourism and new developments, what long-term trends do you think will most significantly shape the future of the hotel and lodging industry here?
That's a good question.
And how will changing traveler preferences play into that?
I think that's something we all need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
Good.
Thank you from all of us at Murphy Business Sales for taking the time to learn about this important topic. We look forward to working together to achieve your business aspirations. For more information or a complimentary consultation for sell-side services, visit us at murphybusiness.com/Edison and complete our Contact Us form.